The story of a man who was thrown overboard a ship, drifted on a raft for 10 days without food or drink, was declared a national hero, received the kiss of several beauty queens, became rich from advertising, and then fell out of favor with the government and was forgotten forever. History of this story on February 28, 1955. It was reported that during a thunderstorm in the Caribbean Sea, 8 crew members of the destroyer Calders fell into the water and went missing. The ship sailed from the American port of Mobile, where it was repaired, to the Colombian port of Cartagena, where it arrived exactly on schedule 2 hours after the tragedy. The search for the missing sailors began immediately, and not without the assistance of American soldiers who control the Panama Canal Zone and are engaged in other charitable activities in the southern Caribbean. After 4 days, the search ended and the missing sailors were officially declared dead. However, a week later, one of them, barely alive, turned up on a deserted shore in northern Colombia, having drifted for 10 days on a raft without water or food. His name was Luis Alejandro Velasco. My book is a journalistic record of his story, and I publish it in the same form in which it appeared a month after the disaster in the pages of the Espectador newspaper, published in Bogota. While trying to recreate step-by-step the misadventures of Luis Alejandro, he and I did not think or guess that our tedious research would entail a chain of new adventures that would seriously agitate society and for which he would pay with fame and career. And I would almost pay with my life. Colombia was then under the heel of a military dictator, very colorful character, General Gustavo Rojas Pinilla, who became famous mainly for 2 exploits: shooting of students in the center of the capital, when soldiers dispersed a peaceful demonstration with bullets, and the murder of fans of a Sunday bullfight. How many of them fell at the hands of secret police agents will apparently remain a mystery, shrouded in darkness. And they were killed because they booed the dictator's daughter in the square during a bullfight. Censorship was rampant, and opposition. Newspapers racked their brains every day, coming up with entertaining but non-political topics that could interest readers. At the Espectador newspaper, this venerable task of baking one-day scoops was entrusted to director Guillermo O'Connor, editor-in-chief Jose Salga, and me, a staff writer. None of us are over 30 yet. When Luis Alejandro Velasco personally came to us to find out how much we would pay him for the story, we greeted him coolly, and for good reason. The sensation was not the first freshness. He was kept for several months in a hospital for sailors, where except for a reporter from an opposition newspaper who sneaked in under the guise of a doctor, only representatives of the royal press were allowed in. The story has been told many times in parts, procrastinated and distorted. And it seems that readers have become tired of the hero who was hired to advertise watches because his own worked flawlessly even in a storm, or to praise shoes because his boots turned out to be so durable that, having decided to dine on them, he could not tear a single piece from them. Luis Alejandro received the order, made patriotic speeches on the radio, was shown on television for the edification of the younger generation, and was driven across almost the entire country amid fanfare, showers of flowers, to sign autographs and receive kisses from beauty queens. He made a decent amount of money from all this, and if, after we tried so many times in vain to meet him, he himself, without an invitation, came to us, it means that his stories were exhausted and he was ready to tell anything for money. In addition, the government clearly gave him clear instructions on what to talk about and what to keep quiet about. We kicked him. But then, as if on a whim, Guillermo O'Connor caught up with Luis Alejandro on the stairs, accepted his offer and escorted him to me. And it turned out to be a kind of time bomb. The first surprise for me was that this strong 20-year-old guy, looking more like a trumpeter than a national hero, had an excellent gift for storytelling, the ability to summarize facts, an amazing memory, and a kind of common people's sense of self-esteem that did not allow him to boast of his heroism. In 26-hour sessions, during which I scribbled notes and asked tricky questions, trying to catch him in contradictions, we managed to piece together a concise and truthful account of Luis Alejandro's 10 days at sea. It turned out to be so complete and exciting that I had only one literary task: to make readers believe in it. Therefore, but not only for this reason, but also for the sake of fairness, we decided to write a story in the first person and put the signature of Luis Alejandro under it. So today I actually speak for the first time as the author of this text. Luis Alejandro gave me a second, a much greater, surprise on the 4th day of our work, when I asked him to describe the thunderstorm that caused the disaster. He smiled and answered, understanding the cost of such a confession. But there was no thunderstorm. Indeed, the Meteorological Service confirmed that February was quite normal, calm and serene in the Caribbean. The truth, which until then had been suppressed by the newspapers, was that the ship was listing from the wind. The cargo, poorly secured on the deck, fell into the sea, and 8 sailors ended up in the water with it. Thus, 3 gross violations were revealed. Firstly, it was not allowed to transport cargo on board the destroyer. Secondly, the ship lost maneuverability and was unable to pick up people thrown overboard precisely because of overload. And finally, the cargo was smuggled and was transported refrigerators, televisions, and washing machines. It is absolutely clear that the story, unexpectedly for us, turned out to be a kind of destroyer with a poorly fortified political and moral cargo on board. The story was published and continued in 14 issues of the newspaper. At first, even the government itself welcomed the literary debut of its hero. Then, when the truth came to light, trying to stop us from publishing a continuation would mean getting into a puddle. Because the newspaper's circulation almost doubled and a crowd of readers constantly gathered in front of our building, wanting to have the whole story and buying up old issues. Then, according to the tradition adopted by Colombian rulers, the dictatorship decided to veil the truth with ranting. It published a communique in which the transportation of contraband goods on board the destroyer was categorically denied. Looking for evidence that we were right, we asked Luis Alejandro for a list of his comrades who had cameras. Many sailors scattered around the country, spending their holidays in different places, but we still managed to find them and buy photographs from them taken during the voyage. A week after the completion of publication in the newspaper, the entire story was published in a special supplement, illustrated with photographs that we bargained with the sailors. In the background of group shots in the most distinct way, right down to the branded signs, boxes of contraband goods were visible. In response to this blow, the dictatorship applied draconian measures against us, and as a result, the newspaper was closed a few months later. Despite all the pressure, threats, and attempts to seduce Luis Alejandro Velasco with large bribes, he did not refuse a single word. He had to part with the profession of a sailor, the only one he had, and the memory of him sank into oblivion of everyday life. Almost 2 years passed and the dictatorship fell. Other regimes began to control the destinies of Colombia, which looked more decent, but were approximately the same fare. And meanwhile I went to Paris, where my restless and rather dreary life of an exile began. Very reminiscent of a raft given up to the will of the waves. And for a long time we heard nothing about the sailor in distress. But a few months ago some journalist accidentally discovered him among the clerks of a bus company. I saw his photograph. Luis Alejandro grew heavier and older, had a hard time, but remained the same bright personality, a hero who dared to blow up his own monument. I haven't reread this story for 15 years. It could well be published, although I don't see much point in it. It is now being published as a separate book, because I once, without thinking, agreed to its publication and am not used to taking back my words. It depresses me to think that publishers are interested not so much in the merits of the work itself as in the name of its author. To my mind, unfortunately, it's in vogue these days. Fortunately, the authors of some books are not those who write them, but those who suffered through them, and here's one of such works. And therefore, the copyright to it belongs to someone who deserves it. My unknown compatriot, who had to suffer for 10 days on a raft without water or food in order for this book to be born. Barcelona, February 1970. Chapter 1 about my comrades who died at sea on February 22. They announced to us that we were returning to Colombia. We had been in Mobile, Alabama, for 8 months, repairing electronic equipment and updating the weapons of our destroyer called us. While the ship was being repaired, the crew members underwent special training. On our free days, we did what sailors usually do on land. We went to the cinema with the girls, and then gathered at the Port Tavern Joe Palica, drank whiskey and periodically got into fights. My girlfriend's name was Mary Edris, and I was introduced to her 2 months after we arrived in Mobile by the girlfriend of another sailor. Although Spanish came easily to Mary, I don't think she ever understood why my friends called her Maria Direction. That is, address. Whenever I was given leave, I invited her to the cinema. We communicated in broken English and distorted Spanish, but we always understood each other, both in the cinema and in the ice cream parlor. The only time I went to the cinema without Mary was the night we saw the King Riot. Someone told my comrades that this is an excellent film about the life of sailors on a trawler, so we went to see it. But what we liked most was not the trawler, but the storm. We unanimously decided that in such a storm we should change the course of the ship, as the rebels did. When we, shocked by the film, were returning to the ship, the sailor Diego Velazquez said, referring to the upcoming voyage, "What if we find ourselves in such trouble?" I admit, I was shocked too. During the 8 months I spent on land,